Okay, so what if I told you that how your kids feel, their moods, how they behave, how well they focus.
Yeah.
Maybe it doesn't just start in their heads.
Mm.
What if it actually starts somewhere? Well, somewhere totally different. Like, what if it starts in their tummies?
That does sound a bit strange, doesn't it? Because we always think, the brain's the boss of all that.
Exactly. We think head first. And that's exactly why we're doing this deep dive. You brought us all this information, stacks of it. And our mission is to unpack these kinds of confusing topics using the real stuff you shared.
Right.
So today we're diving deep into this really amazing and maybe often overlooked connection between a child's gut and their brain.
And our goal is pretty straightforward. Pull out the key things, the most surprising stuff you need to know, and make it quick and clear.
Yeah, you'll see how things you might not even connect, like what kids eat or maybe being too clean, or even just how they handle stress.
Uh-huh.
It all seems to tie back to their gut health.
It really does. So, should we jump into this tummy brain superhighway?
Let's do it. It's called the gut-brain axis. Basically, you can think of it like a super busy two-way road running between the gut and the brain.
Yeah, a constant communication channel. But what's really fascinating is which direction most of the messages are flowing.
Oh.
The research suggests the gut actually sends way more signals up to the brain than the brain sends down to the gut. We're talking like maybe 80 to 90% of the communication is gut to brain.
80 to 90%.
Yeah.
Wow. So the tummy it's almost like a second brain then.
Or maybe even the first brain, based on that information flow.
Huh. And the little microbes, the tiny bugs living in the gut, they actually have a direct line to influencing how the brain works.
Absolutely. And that's really why paying attention to your child's gut bacteria, their microbiome, is so, so important. These tiny communities, they're like little factories down there.
Factories. Doing what?
Well, they help make really crucial brain chemicals, neurotransmitters they're called. These affect mood, how well kids can focus, even how they sleep.
Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting, right? Because we learned that a huge chunk of serotonin, the chemical that helps us feel happy and relaxed.
Right, the feel-good one.
Up to like 90% of it is made right there in the gut.
90%. And dopamine too, the one involved in reward, attention, focus.
Yeah.
Almost half of that is produced in the gut.
Okay, so let's connect the dots then. If the gut bugs aren't happy, or maybe there aren't enough of the right kind, they might not be making enough of these happy chemicals, these focus chemicals.
Exactly. And what might that look like in a child? Well, the sources suggest it could show up as maybe more anxiety, perhaps quicker meltdowns or tantrums, or just having a really tough time concentrating. It's presented as a direct link.
And it's not just those big names like serotonin and dopamine.
Yeah.
These gut bugs, they also make other special things, right? Short-chain fatty acids.
Yes. Things like butyrate, propionate, acetate. And these are unique. They only come from the gut microbes fermenting fiber.
And what do they do?
They're super important. They help with the body's defenses. They help calm down that sort of hidden fire inflammation. And they help repair tissues. Crucial stuff.
Crucial stuff made by the bugs from the food kids eat. Got it. So if these microbes are so vital, what's messing them up for kids today? The sources point to quite a few things.
Yeah, several big factors. First off, just how they enter the world can make a difference.
They're born.
Yeah. Babies born via C-section, for instance, they miss out on that initial big dose of mom's beneficial bacteria they'd normally get passing through the birth canal. They tend to pick up more microbes from the hospital environment initially.
Okay, that makes sense. What else?
Food is a huge one, especially all the processed foods kids tend to eat nowadays. They're often packed with things like emulsifiers, artificial flavors, preservatives, and this stuff can actually harm the good gut bacteria and potentially damage the gut lining, making it kind of holey or leaky.
Holy like a leaky fence. We'll come back to that, I bet.
We will. Another surprising one might be, well, being too clean.
Too clean?
Yeah, there's this idea called the hygiene hypothesis. Basically, our modern world might be a bit too sterile. Kids actually need some exposure to everyday dirt and microbes from nature to build a really robust gut microbiome.
It makes me think about how babies are always putting everything in their mouths.
Exactly. One idea mentioned is that historically that was part of how they sampled their environment, getting inoculated with beneficial microbes to build up their gut immunity right from the start.
Collecting their tiny tummy buddies. I like that.
It's a neat way to think about it. But other things work against this, like stress.
Stress affects the gut too.
big time. Any kind of stress, whether it's emotional or physical, can really slow down digestion or even kind of shut down gut function temporarily. And stress hormones can actually feed the bad bacteria in the gut.
Wow.
One source even made the comparison that chronic stress can act like taking a tiny dose of antibiotics every single time you're stressed.
Which leads us nicely, or maybe not so nicely, to actual antibiotics. Probably the biggest disruptor mentioned.
Yeah, they're described as a major one. Because while they're needed sometimes to kill harmful bacteria causing an infection, they don't discriminate. They wipe out a lot of the beneficial bacteria right along with the bad ones.
And the impact can be pretty serious, according to the research you shared.
It really can. One finding highlighted was that just a single course of antibiotics given to a toddler could potentially increase their risk for developing any kind of mental health challenge later on by as much as 50%.
50% from just one round. That's staggering.
The more rounds of antibiotics a child has, the higher that risk seems to climb based on the data presented.
And it wasn't just antibiotics, right? Other common meds were mentioned too.
That's right. Things like antihistamines, birth control pills, even some antidepressants were noted as potentially disrupting the gut microbiome.
It really makes you think, especially since the sources also mentioned that maybe over half of antibiotic prescriptions might not even be strictly necessary.
And the impact, particularly in those crucial early years, can apparently last for a long, long time. Years, even.
Okay, let's circle back to that holy tummy idea you mentioned. Leaky gut.
Right. So the lining of the gut is meant to be a really strong barrier, like a very fine mesh screen. It's designed to let tiny digested nutrients pass through into the bloodstream.
The good stuff.
Exactly. But keep out the bigger unwanted things like undigested food particles, toxins, harmful microbes.
If it gets leaky, those unwanted things can slip through.
That's the idea. They get into the bloodstream where they don't belong, and the body sees them as invaders. This triggers the immune system and creates inflammation, that hidden fire, not just in the gut, but potentially all over the body.
And this isn't just a minor issue, is it? This chronic body-wide inflammation from a leaky gut.
It's linked to a huge range of chronic health problems. It's considered a major underlying factor. One meta-analysis mentioned even linked stress-induced gut leakiness and the resulting inflammation to being a potential driver behind many major chronic diseases, calling it maybe the #1 killer worldwide indirectly.
Wow. And stress itself can cause this leakiness.
Yes, the research presented indicates that stress can directly increase gut permeability. They can even measure it sometimes by looking at levels of a protein called zonulin in stool tests.
That really hammers home the connection between our feelings and our physical gut health.
It's incredibly interconnected.
Okay, moving beyond the gut itself, the sources brought up some other, maybe even more surprising connections to kids' health and behavior, like their teeth, oral health.
Yeah, that was interesting. The idea is that inflammation in the mouth, say from cavities or gum issues, doesn't just stay local. It can affect the whole body, including the nervous system.
There were some specific concerns raised there too.
Definitely. One study mentioned linked higher fluoride exposure to potentially lower IQ scores in children. Another point was that some medications, like certain ADHD meds, can cause dry mouth.
Right.
Which unfortunately makes kids more prone to getting cavities.
And then there was that really specific kind of strange point about dental materials.
Yes, the stainless steel crowns that are commonly used on kids' baby molars. The sources suggested that if these metal crowns are in the mouth along with other types of metal fillings, it could potentially create a tiny electrical current. Galvanism, it's called.
Electrical current in the mouth.
That's the theory presented, and the suggestion was that this subtle electrical activity could potentially interfere with brain well-being.
Wow. There was a story about that, wasn't there?
There was. A striking case study of a 6-year-old boy who developed persistent tics. He had several of these stainless steel crowns on teeth that had needed root canals, mostly due to decay from, well, a high sugar intake.
Okay.
And the story goes that when those crowned teeth were eventually removed, the tics gradually disappeared. It really makes you pause and ask, could my child's dental work be impacting their behavior? It's a question raised by this information.
That's definitely not something most parents would ever think about. What other surprising factors came up?
Heavy metals were another big concern highlighted, especially finding them in common kids' foods.
Yeah, I saw that. Scary stuff.
The study tested a wide range of baby foods and kids' snacks and found contaminants like cadmium, lead, and arsenic in, I think it was 95% of them.
95%.
Yeah.
Were certain foods worse?
Rice-based products and sweet potatoes were often higher, according to the report. And interestingly, buying organic didn't necessarily mean the food was free from these heavy metals.
So even trying to buy healthy doesn't always protect from these environmental toxins.
It's challenging because these metals are just sort of present in the soil and water now. Soy formula also got a specific mention.
Why soy formula?
Because it naturally contains higher levels of manganese. And the concern raised is that in infants under about 6 months old, their protective blood-brain barrier isn't fully developed yet.
Okay.
So potentially excess manganese could accumulate in the brain during that critical period, and there's speculation this might be linked to issues later on, like balance problems or maybe even Parkinson's-like symptoms much later in life.
Gosh, that's worrying for parents relying on soy formula.
It is, and the sources acknowledge that completely avoiding metals is basically impossible in today's world. The suggestion wasn't to panic, but rather to focus on supporting the body's natural detoxification systems through a healthy lifestyle. A detox lifestyle, they called it.
Right, helping the body handle what it can't avoid. Okay, let's switch gears to something almost every kid loves. Sugar. We all know it's bad for teeth, causes cavities. But the sources say it's doing a lot more harm in the gut, right?
Absolutely. Sugar is like superfood for the wrong kinds of microbes in the gut, especially certain types of yeast, like candida.
And get this, these yeast, when they thrive, can apparently send signals up to the brain that make your child crave more sugar.
So that intense sugar craving might literally be coming from the microbes in their gut demanding to be fed.
Crazy. And there's more. When these yeast munch on sugar, they ferment it. And what's a byproduct of fermentation?
Alcohol. Tiny amounts, but still.
So that classic scenario kid eats sugary treat, gets a wild sugar rush, and crashes into being super irritable, weepy, or totally spaced out.
Yeah.
The sources suggest that might actually be partly due to these yeast-producing alcohol byproducts in their gut. It's compared to how adults act when they've had a bit too much to drink. The mood swings, the spaciness.
Wow, that paints a very different picture of a sugar crash.
Doesn't it? And the sources were clear. Sugar is highly addictive. It activates the reward centers in the brain, similarly to drugs like cocaine, perhaps even more powerfully, some studies suggest.
And artificial sweeteners aren't the answer either, apparently. One study mentioned showed rats actually choosing saccharin over intravenous cocaine when offered both.
Whoa.
It highlights how processed foods in general are often engineered to be incredibly addictive, hitting those bliss points.
And here's a really sobering connection that was made in the materials.
Okay.
Studies have apparently linked high consumption of sugar and sweets in childhood to a greater likelihood of alcohol and drug use later in life, and even in one UK study, arrests for violent crime by age 35.
That's quite a link. From sugar to serious adult problems.
It really underscores the point made that nutrition education in schools isn't just about health class fluff. It could be a vital tool for preventing major societal issues. What kids eat profoundly impacts their behavior, their intelligence, their happiness, and even their risk for violence and addiction. It's framed as a massive missed opportunity.
It really broadens the scope of why nutrition matters, doesn't it? Far beyond just physical growth.
Totally. So, okay, we've talked about all these potential problems, gut bugs, leaky gut, toxins, sugar. How can parents actually figure out if any of this is going on with their kid?
Well, the good news is there are ways to investigate. Testing can be really helpful according to the sources.
What kind of tests?
Comprehensive stool tests were highlighted as being particularly valuable.
Stool tests. What can they show?
A lot, actually. They can give a picture of the balance of beneficial versus potentially harmful bacteria, check for parasites or yeast overgrowth, measure markers for inflammation, and even see how well your child is digesting their food.
Can they check for that leaky gut thing?
Yes, some tests can measure levels of that protein zonulin we talked about earlier, which is considered a marker for gut permeability or leakiness.
Okay. What about checking nutrient levels, like vitamins and minerals?
Blood work is an option for checking things like iron, zinc, vitamin D levels that are often found to be low in kids dealing with focus or behavioral issues.
But blood tests can be tough for kids.
They can be stressful, absolutely. So the sources also suggested alternatives like keeping detailed food diaries to spot potential gaps, looking for physical signs like little white spots on fingernails for zinc, or paleness suggesting low iron, and sometimes carefully considered supplementation can be useful and low risk even without exact levels for certain nutrients.
Okay, so there are tools available, which is good to know. Now for the really important part. Based on all this information, what can parents actually do? What are the action steps to help support their kids' guts and, by extension, their brains?
Well, the encouraging message from the sources is that it doesn't necessarily have to be super complicated or overwhelming. Simple, consistent steps can make a really significant difference.
It's good to hear.
And one important point that was emphasized is that parents really need to consider their own gut health as well.
Oh, right. Why is that?
Because families living together share their environment, and that means they share microbes. You develop a sort of family microbiome. If one person's gut health is out of balance, it can actually impact everyone else in the household. So helping yourself directly helps your kids too.
We're all in this microbiome together. Makes sense. Okay, so specific actions for the kids. Probiotics came up a lot.
Yes, adding beneficial bacteria probiotics is often recommended. But the sources stress the importance of choosing the right ones, perhaps looking for specific strains that have research behind them for particular benefits, like Lactobacillus rhamnosus GG or Bifidobacterium longum 1714 were mentioned as examples.
You can't just add good bugs, you have to feed them too, right?
Yeah.
Prebiotics.
Exactly. Prebiotics are specific types of dietary fiber that act as food for the beneficial bacteria. Things like FOS, GOS, XOS, these are names you might see. Interestingly, some of these are naturally abundant in breast milk, nature's first prebiotic food.
Feed the good guys.
Yeah.
And fiber also helps keep things moving, right? It helps get toxins out daily.
Definitely. Regular bowel movements are crucial for detoxification. The sources suggested aiming for around 8 to 10 grams of fiber per day for kids, depending on age.
What else? Colorful foods.
Yes. Eating a variety of colorful plant foods, especially berries like blueberries, raspberries, blackberries, is great. They're rich in compounds called polyphenols, which also support a healthy gut microbiome.
And connecting back to that too clean idea, get them outside.
Absolutely. Spend time in nature. The suggestion was maybe 30 minutes 2 or 3 times a week, almost like a prescription for nature.
A nature prescription.
And maybe, just maybe, let them eat a snack outside without immediately reaching for the hand sanitizer after touching a leaf or some dirt. That interaction with natural environmental microbes helps strengthen their own gut ecosystem.
Builds resilience. Okay, what about stress? We know it's bad for the gut.
Right. So teaching kids simple stress management techniques is key. Things that help activate the calm down part of the nervous system, the vagus nerve.
Like what?
Deep breathing exercises, humming or singing, simple meditation or mindfulness practices, laughter. Even just eating enough fiber helps vagal tone. The point wasn't that stress itself is bad. Challenges are part of life, but chronic unmanaged stress is the problem. Teaching kids tools to cope with stress rather than just trying to avoid it is crucial.
Foundational healthy diet obviously is huge. Whole foods, nutrient dense, organic where feasible.
And sometimes kids might need a little extra digestive support, like digestive enzymes taken with meals, or maybe a bit of apple cider vinegar diluted in water before eating, as suggested in the sources.
And tackling that inflammation.
Yes. Omega-3 fatty acids are really important here. They're anti-inflammatory and help balance out the pro-inflammatory omega-6s that are high in many processed foods. Good sources are fatty fish or algae-based supplements for kids who don't eat fish.
Vitamin D too.
Crucial for immune function. Many kids are low, especially in winter months or if they don't get much sun exposure, so supplementation is often needed.
Okay, circling back to the mouth. Oral health action steps.
Limiting sugar and processed snacks is number 1. Good basic hygiene, brushing properly, maybe using a water flosser once permanent teeth are in. Being mindful of toothpaste ingredients was also mentioned, maybe looking for natural options with xylitol or erythritol, which can reduce cavity-causing bacteria, or calcium hydroxyapatite, which helps remineralize enamel.
And there was something about oral probiotics.
Yes, chewable probiotics specifically designed to support a healthy balance of bacteria in the mouth. It's a newer area, but studies are emerging, apparently even starting in kids now.
Interesting. And finally, that slightly uncomfortable topic of parasites.
Yeah, it was touched upon briefly. Basic prevention, like washing produce well and cooking meat thoroughly, helps. But the main defense is a strong, healthy immune system supported by good nutrition and lifestyle.
But sometimes more might be needed.
The sources mention that in many other cultures, periodic use of gentle, herbal parasite cleanses is quite common. Herbs like mosa pudica seed, black walnut hull, wormwood were mentioned as possibilities, used cautiously and at appropriate doses for children.
Right. Okay, so lots of potential action steps there to really bring home the impact these kinds of changes can have. The sources shared a couple of really powerful stories, didn't they?
They did. Really hopeful stories. There was one about an 8-year-old girl. Let's call her Susie. She was having major behavioral issues, tantrums. She was failing in school, had really low self-esteem.
It's tough.
Very. But they eventually discovered she had celiac disease, a severe reaction to gluten, and also sensitivities to artificial food dyes. Once they changed her diet to remove those triggers, her behavior and school performance apparently improved dramatically just from changing her food.
Wow. And the other story? A teenager.
Yes, a 14-year-old boy who was struggling profoundly with severe mental health symptoms, suicidal thoughts, anger, depression, anxiety, ADHD symptoms. He'd apparently tried 9 different psychiatric medications without significant help.
9 medications, that's heartbreaking.
It really is. But further investigation revealed underlying physical issues. Severe insulin resistance, very low levels of vitamin D, B12, and magnesium, and an autoimmune thyroid condition called Hashimoto's.
So physical problems fueling the mental health crisis.
That's how it's presented. And by addressing those underlying issues, simple dietary changes, targeted nutrient supplements, he reportedly started to feel hope for the first time and began to thrive. The story mentioned he's now 18 and doing well.
Those stories, they really show how powerful these fundamental changes can be, even in really serious situations, don't they?
They really do. They highlight that often what looks purely like a mental or behavioral issue might have deep physical roots in the gut, in inflammation or nutrient deficiencies. And the hopeful part is that kids' bodies are incredibly resilient. They can often bounce back remarkably quickly when given the right support, the right nutrition, addressing the gut, managing stress.
It's actually quite incredible when you think about it, the power we have just by focusing on these foundational pillars of health.
Mm-hmm.
So the big takeaway from this whole deep dive seems crystal clear. A healthy gut is just absolutely crucial, non-negotiable, really for kids' mental health, their behavior, their focus, their overall well-being. So many common childhood struggles appear to be linked back to what's happening in their tummies, to that hidden fire of inflammation, and to missing key nutrients.
Absolutely. And the really encouraging message is that the steps to support gut health don't have to be extreme. Focusing on real food, managing stress, getting kids playing outside, paying attention to oral health, and investigating potential underlying issues like nutrient gaps or infections, these things can make a massive difference.
A huge difference. You know, we've covered a lot today: food, toxins, antibiotics, even teeth. But we only really scratched the surface of how our feelings and experiences, things like significant stress, emotional challenges, maybe even trauma, directly impact the gut and brain connection in kids. That was hinted at in the sources.
That whole mind-body feedback loop, it's incredibly powerful and definitely warrants a deeper look.
It really does. How our emotions shape our gut and how our gut shapes our emotions. That's definitely something we need to dive into more next time. But for now, we'd love to hear what you, listening in, think about all this. What surprised you the most from our deep dive today? Was there an aha moment for you?
Yeah, what stood out?
Please scroll down and leave us a comment. We genuinely want to hear your thoughts and reactions.